a channel delivering a message, saving the planet from all the corruption of contaminations. A town like environment opposes genetically modified products, and they demanded an end labeling genetic modified foods sold in the states and those retail establishments. The bill was enacted on May 8th, 2014. Unlike labeling laws passed in Maine and Connecticut, Vermont law does not require other states to act first for products to be labeled. On the day the law was enacted, a consortium of corporate interests, including the food manufacturers, the Food Administration Association, the International Dairy Association, and the Snack Food Association, announced that it will be sued the state to prevent the law from taking effect. For more information, I will leave a link about this down below. Vermont had done something vital for the future of the country and the world too. Some have described this as a grassroots initiative, and it is from the foundations that we islanders can also achieve the exchange with these ideas too. Not only is the GMO labeling law being challenged, but elections are being held on the conditions hostile, which no democracy should tolerate. It's the empire of money, an empire of corporations, and the state has presented a concrete challenge to defend the rights and freedoms of individuals to protect the environment and care for this planet. They want to put too many poor people and God's creation in stock. With that money blocked in California and Washington, and they are trying to block right there on Colorado and Oregon. But being small has its advantages, though. The greatest advantage we got is to be forgotten. And from there, you can spread the wings of freedom. That's why the Bible gives us encouragement and tells us the strong will be like tinder, and what he made like a spark, both will be kindled, and no one will be able to quench them. This is according to the book of Isaiah 131. Because no matter how many ways they invent to enslave the land and the poor, justice is on the way. Although, right now, we desperately need these wings of freedom, because it is around food that the entire all total litigation of colonization is being established. Food, which is the very basics of life, has been exchanged for currency. Food from fertile land is the energy that sustains all life forms. And it is what connects to all life on this planet. That is becoming a target of control, the largest of profit for a new few. That goal of creating an unreal world, which we accepted, will make life even impossible to live. That is why what they have done in environment is significant for the future of life on Earth and the future of the tropical islands, small like Puerto Rico. There's a very direct, not indirect, conflict between people's freedom and the right to protect their health, their liberty, and the environment. And on the other side, they have the corporate power to destroy everything, to destroy the planet, to destroy health, and of course, to rob us of our ideal of an island forever having the fertile land. And they invent completely false promises. Ever since they told Moses in the desert, there were graves in Egypt. So you have brought us to die in the desert? As it teaches the Bible in Exodus 14:11. Because they have been idolaters of money as well as graves. There is a challenge with the Center for Food Security. And this message was sent because they need to be informed by people who care about the nature of things and begin with the fact that one way to cultivate plant varieties is to have genetically modified crops throughout biotechnology to make them more productive and more climate resistant, according to them. But none of those claims are true. That's not true. Genetic engineering cannot increase the yield of a crop. That comes from conventional breeding or procreating by conventional, whether by farmers or older seed companies. Those companies, the old ones. All genetic engineering does is insert a gene that doesn't belong to that organism, using genetic engineering tools. These tools essentially allow the transfer of genes between species. Therefore, it allows the introduction of genes that will never have been present in that crop, or food, or plant, throughout the reproduction. The same thing happens when that chemical formaldehyde and the arsenic chemicals leaching from coffins in cemeteries until they exit the water underground and the fertile soil. Because natural reproduction is needed on small islands, including genetic improvement with human intelligence. Rice, cross it with rice, wheat with wheat, corn with corn. Now you have genes from soil organisms that produces toxins, and plants that are from the same family. They manufacture sets of toxic genes to resist more toxins, which is now a herbicide tolerance. Even before genetic engineering began, the industrial system of agriculture was already a failure in food security, a burden of the planet, And it has begun to become a dangerous burden of health in all the planet. This is the century of family farming. And the United Nations has published data this past year showing that most food comes from small farms. Another area where small is an advantage. And it's not from large industrial farms. Large industrial farms, in any case, are not part of food systems. They are part of input systems to pay their creditors, even if they have no right to collect. Because their toxic chemicals are introduced, fossil fuels are introduced, many of those CH3. And raw material are obtained with a lot of pollution. Only a 30% of food comes from the industrial farms. As for genetically modified crops, most of those growing on the planet are the corn and the soy, and only 10% is destined for human consumptions. The rest of it goes to the production of biofuel and animal feed. Therefore, it is not a full system. It is not a full system from an ecological point of view. Because the web of life is a food web that comes from a natural symbiosis. We realize the life of the soil is the web of life within. Something that they cannot see when they arrive on tropical islands and spread all the plastic chemicals all over it without stopping. On the surface, the web of life is astonishing symbiosis between plants, insects, and animals. Therefore, there it is, the eternal justice of symbiosis. If we didn't have those pollinators, we will lose approximately 1/3 of food production. And now, there's ample evidence that between pesticides and genetically modified crops, pollinators, they are dying. A study conducted at the University of Cornell University in the late 1990s, in which a monarch butterfly were fed collected pollen from corn and non-GMOs corn pollen, showed that the butterfly larvae die when fed bee pollen. They die. The monarch butterfly needs the natural sources, which is being destroyed by that chemical Roundup herbicides used on Roundup resistant crops today. And the monarch butterfly population has been reduced to 1/10 of what it used to be, in what it once was. Mexico, the cradle of corn, where a wild plant transformed into thousands of varieties, and where Mexicans consider themselves the corn people, is making tremendous efforts to prevent the entry of genetically modified corn. Last year, Monsanto tried to plant genetically modified corn on 6 million acres at once. Only by a lawsuit has stopped this thing. The monarch butterfly is also disappearing. There are two great symbols of the sacred. Those are two great sacred things in the Caribbean. In the butterfly world and the corn, those things are disappearing. But a lot of the Roundup herbicide merchants, those merchants don't know that the competition between life in its diversity, beauty, freedom, and abundance, they don't know about that. It's against a structure that only knows slavery of God's creation. And on the other hand, they own the specialty of killing only. The planet's ecological destruction originates from an industrial agriculture model. Something most people are unaware of it. In 1995, the United Nations organized a conference on resources of phylogenetics to access that loss of diversity. And the country's assessment agreement revealed that 75% of the agricultural diversity had disappeared. We are talking about 95% before globalization, before the introduction of transgenic monocultures throughout Argentina, throughout Brazil, throughout Venezuela, US, throughout Canada, and the cotton growing regions of India. As far water, as in some countries, 90% is allocated. But on average, 75% is used for industrial agriculture irrigations. You can see that clearly when you fly over the US, especially the West. You realize the enormous amount of water used in the desert. And then they struggle to cultivate crops in drought years. But the whole system is based on toxic chemicals. Those toxic chemicals are killing the life, structure, and fertile things of the soil. Leviticus 18:3 says, and you should not do as they do in the land of Egypt. Because a desert cannot be compared to a tropical island. In farmer training for organic agriculture, they will take an earthworm and spray it with a pinch of urea. That's a water-soluble organic compound, which is a nitrogenous fertilizer. And then scatter a small amount to observe what was happening to the earthworm. And that way, they could learn how they were killing the earth or the soil. But now, they are killing everything. Today, they're killing everything. A study was carried out on what's happening on the soil transgenic cotton areas. Already in less than 4 years since the planting of 22% of the beneficial soil, organisms had died. This includes the organisms that break down biomass into mineral that crops can absorb. During the period when animals graze in these genetically modified cotton fields, 1,800 animals had died because of that. The government veterinary department performed an autopsy on the animals and found toxins in the digestive tracts, indicating that the biomass hasn't been digested. They consulted with the scientists who suggested that the soil organism might be dying. Similarly, soil organisms in our intestine are dying too. And this is even the reason why the animals are dying too. The beneficial bacteria are dying. Toxins, the glyphosate, or the Roundup resistant crops. The damage to our guts is enormous today. And if they have an epidemic in huge countries, in large countries, what can we imagine in places the size of the island of Puerto Rico? That means that the cemeteries don't belong in what was once fertile soil. And what some people keep saying is, it needs to be analyzed. But it seems like the only thing being analyzed today is the money they bring to their pockets. So 75% of the basic biodiversity of the soil and water is impacted. And 40% of greenhouse gases come from industrial globalization. Agriculture combines carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. And everything, I'm telling you, we could reduce it all to the size of a field or a protocol. Among the things that scribes today they keep. By 2050, they will need a follow-up treaty for this. They are aiming for a 5% reduction throughout emissions trading. Emissions have increased to 17%, but we could reduce them to a 40% by switching to organic farming and allowing natural burials for the dead and cremating most cadavers or dead bodies on islands the size of Puerto Rico. The transformation whose foundation rests on your commitment is because we are not living in the times of our grandfathers. And we need these reforms on the islands. And since there is a continuously between the health of the soil, the health of the planet, and our own health, we cannot separate them. The violation of the planet's health becomes a violation of our own health. There are some scientists today studying these. And there are some countries that are just upright, honest, and allow the scientists to do so. Study this. This country doesn't do that because biological warfare benefits a select few. At the 1992 Earth Summit, 2 international treaties were signed as part of the biodiversity negotiations. One was for the protection of species diversity, the other for mitigating climate change. One is called the Convention of Biological Diversity, and the other the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. In other words, IPCC. The Intergovernmental Organization of Scientists has just published a report on how there is a 95% certainly that the human's action is to blame for causing the current instability. You can't call that a climate change. You cannot call that a climate change because there's nothing predictable about it. So it should be called climate chaos and disruption But at least we can reach an agreement of some government reforms. Biosecurity will limit the impact of chemical on biodiversity. And that's in an article 19.3 on the treaty, UN. They then appointed a group of experts to work out how this will be implemented. That's what they call the Cartagena Protocol on biodiversity. I mean, about safety. Most of the word has implemented in here by a protocol. But then President Bush withdrew without signing it. And he said, I will not allow the biotechnology to be affected. But then he came back and asked his vice president to spell out the word that is the basics of the challenge. That's what those other organizations in the sector are doing today. And the word is substantial equivalence, which basically means to assume a natural organism is like genetically modified organisms. And they want to translate this as not to look, not to see, not to find, and not to speak about it. So that no poor person can discuss it, much less analyze it. So that they remain ignorant about the security matters of a small island of Puerto Rico. And the failure to consult those statements is constantly repeated when they say there is no evidence of danger. Of course, if you don't look where the danger are, where will you find the danger? Where will you find the problem? And that was the ingredient of Agent Orange. And if, in fact, it was an alternative that they developed Roundup ready crops because they had spent so much money on a chemical to kill in war. And then it was very difficult for them to get rid of it after a while. And regarding that there's no possible way on planet where everything is alive, on a planet where everything is interacting, on a planet where things are evolving, because the saints want to bring the tree of healing for the creation. Just like it is stated on Revelation 22:2. And then, when you govern democratically with your resilience and your collective strength, they manage to pass a labeling law. They go to your courts and say, no, it's absolutely equivalent. This is natural, they say. We call this a double standard, where the same organism involved in invention and unnatural is called ontological schizophrenia of the rich. Ontological schizophrenia stands to the legal challenge. They keep talking about how genetic engineering products plant that don't make a difference in the food they produce. But they do, because the issue isn't material equivalence, which is meaningless when you are changing the genes. What you need to see in genetic is equivalence. That's all, because a corporation is basically a legal construct authorized by society throughout the state, which it is supposed to represent, and a charter corporation is based on the fact that they do operate with society permissions. They are supposed to be working for the common good, and they do not do such things when they begin to divide from that common good. Society has the right to withdraw that permission. And what you do here in this country by saying you have the right is it help the world realize that a corporation is a fiction. Freedom of speech is a construct, and we cannot afford to be governed by fictions, abstractions, and constructed when there is a real world in which people live in and share. I need to be pure and healthy.